341 Leyland Panthers. 1 Brisbane bus contract, signed in 1967. The largest single order of that chassis anywhere on Earth. Bigger than London, bigger than Liverpool, bigger than Stockholm. The entire United Kingdom, across every operator combined, ran around 600 Panthers. Brisbane alone ran 341. They were bodied at a single factory on the corner of Landseer Street and Ingram Road in southern Brisbane. AB Denning, the largest tour coach builder in Australia, run for 33 years by a man who left school at 14 to repair Pacific War aircraft at Archerfield Airfield. The chassis was British. The engine was Detroit. The transmission was Indianapolis. The body was Australian. The profit was foreign. The same British company that owned the factory also gave Australia the Leyland P-76. By 1990, the line had gone silent. Last December, manufacturing at the site quietly stopped for good. Before we go any further, if you want to keep these stories alive, make sure to subscribe. Chapter 1. The Apprentice at Archerfield. The story doesn't start in Acacia Ridge. It doesn't start at the boardroom argument that destroyed the company. It starts at Archerfield Airport on the southern edge of Brisbane, in the middle of the Second World War, with a 14-year-old kid in overalls patching bullet holes in American aircraft. Alan Brown Denning was born in Brisbane on the 13th of February, 1930. The Australian Dictionary of Biography has no entry for him, a fact that becomes more grotesque the further you go into this story, but file it away for later. What is documented is that he left school at the age of 14, halfway through the Second World War, and walked into Archerfield Airport to start an apprenticeship as a sheet metal worker. Archerfield in 1944 was not a sleepy regional aerodrome. From the 20th of July 1942, when General MacArthur moved the Southwest Pacific Area headquarters to Brisbane, Archerfield had been a major United States Army Air Forces repair and maintenance base. B-17 Flying Fortresses, B-24 Liberators, P-40 Kitty Hawks, DC-3 Dakotas, B-26 Marauders, the planes flying combat over New Guinea, Rabaul, the Solomons, they came back to Archerfield with bullet holes in them. They were patched up by Australian apprentices in timber-framed igloo hangars on Kerry Road, hangars built by the Commonwealth Department of Aircraft for Qantas and A&A repair contracts. A 14-year-old Alan Denning, 6 months before D-Day in Europe, was on a Brisbane workshop floor learning sheet metal trades on aircraft that had been shot at over the Pacific. When the war ended in August 1945, the work dried up. The apprenticeship was transferred to Coachcraft, a Brisbane firm that built bodies on truck and bus chassis. He spent the late 40s learning vehicle bodywork. In February 1950, aged 20, Alan Denning leased a tiny shed at 82 Annerley Road, Woolloongabba, on the corner of Ross Street, and started a smash repair business. One man, one shed. By 1955, he had taken on a partner named Len Malloy and 2 employees. They started building ambulances, hearses, motorhomes, utility bodies. Around 1956, he built a Ford Zephyr station wagon conversion for Ford Motor Company itself. And in late 1957, a man named Miller from Lismore came to the Annerley Road shed and asked Alan Denning to build him a 22-passenger bus. Chapter 2. The bus Miller wanted was an International AS-130 side loader, 22 passengers, for a Brisbane to Lismore service called Miller's Cruiser Coach Service. Build number 1, delivered late 1957. The Annerley Road shed had no business building a 22-passenger bus. Alan Denning built it anyway. By January 1961, smash repair had been abandoned entirely. Buses only. The operation moved to a leased facility on Fairfield Road, Yeerongpilly. By December that year, the workshop produced what would prove to be Denning's first commercially significant coach. A 24-year-old operator from a Brisbane outfit called Greyhound, Russell Penfold, had taken an overseas trip in 1960 and come back with detailed specifications based on the standard American intercity coach Ansett Pioneer was importing into Australia at the time. He brought those specifications to Alan Denning. He asked for an Australian-built version. Build number 12 was the result. December 1961. A Commer Avenger chassis with a rear engine conversion engineered by Doug Heron of Balmoral Engineering, East Brisbane. Cost £9,000. Queensland's first air-conditioned coach, although the air conditioning was 4 electric fans mounted on the luggage racks. The advertisement ran in Truck and Bus Transportation magazine in March 1962. AB Denning & Co. Pty Limited was registered the same year. The Highway Traveller went into daily service from Toowoomba to Brisbane to the Gold Coast. It worked. It kept working. In January 1964, Denning bought its first owned premises, Rainham Street, Salisbury. A proper factory. 12 workers became 16, became 24. And on the 8th of August 1966, after 14 weeks of construction, Denning completed build number 125, Brisbane City Council bus number 10. The first rear-engine city bus ever built by an Australian manufacturer, a Leyland Panther chassis, dressed in Arctic white, Araluen blue and Zenith blue. The prototype for what was about to become the largest order of Leyland Panthers anywhere on Earth. The Brisbane Tramways Trust had decided to retire the trams. 340 diesel buses were going to replace them. Brisbane City Council had to choose Australian bodybuilders. Athol Hedges at Northgate, AB Denning at Salisbury. The two of them split the order, and the Salisbury workshop, which had built one rear-engine prototype in 14 weeks, was about to be asked to build 136 production buses. There was no way the Salisbury site could do it. Alan Denning needed a bigger factory. He needed capital. He needed a partner. In 1965, Alan Denning made a phone call to Sydney that would lose him his company. Chapter 3. The Trojan Horse. The phone call went to a Sydney company called Pressed Metal Corporation, PMC, established in the late 1930s as a joint venture between Lark Hoskins, the Austin agents in New South Wales, and Lark, Neve and Carter, the Chrysler distributor. 22 acres at Enfield in Sydney's western suburbs. By 1956, they were producing Leyland bus chassis, Land Rovers, Morris commercial vehicles. Between May 1967 and October 1990, PMC would body 2,289 of the 2,603 buses delivered to the New South Wales Department of Government Transport. Alan Denning rang PMC and asked a simple question. Would PMC be interested in subcontracting their school bus body production to his Brisbane plant? It was a manufacturing capacity offer. Denning had floor space and a workforce in Queensland. PMC had Sydney orders. PMC said no. PMC said something else instead. PMC wanted to buy 51% of AB Denning & Co. The share sale was completed in mid-1965. Denning was running 46 staff at Salisbury at that point. Alan Denning stayed on as managing director, but he no longer owned the factory he had built from a smash repair shed on Annerley Road. The man who had asked Sydney to assemble his subcontract work had instead, in the space of one phone call, handed Sydney a controlling interest. In October 1966, Brisbane City Council awarded the first 204 with Leyland Panther contract to Athol Hedges at Northgate. On the 1st of August 1967, the second contract, 136 buses, went to AB Denning. The price was $1,233,540.40, plus a $34,000 provisional sum. Combined, 340 Leyland Panthers plus the prototype, the largest single order of that chassis anywhere on Earth, bigger than the 200 Panther fleet ordered by Stor Stockholm's Lokaltrafik in Sweden, bigger than the entire Liverpool fleet of 110, bigger than London. The total United Kingdom fleet across all operators was around 600. Brisbane alone took 341. A factory that could body one rear-engine bus in 14 weeks could not body 136 production buses on a Salisbury Street site. In August 1967, Denning moved everything onto a purpose-built 31,000 square metre site on the corner of Landseer Street and Ingram Road, Acacia Ridge. The new factory cost $250,000 in the new decimal currency, 90 staff at the moving date. $2 million in confirmed orders. A small note for later. Years afterwards, they will name the company's most famous tour coach, after the street the factory sits on. Landseer Street, the road. Landseer, the model. Built where it was named. And on the 1st of October 1968, the Sydney company that owned 51% of Denning was bought outright by the British. The new parent's name was Leyland. Chapter 4. The Mono Coach. On the 1st of October 1968, Leyland Motors of Australia acquired Pressed Metal Corporation, and through it, A.B. Denning and Co. Pty Limited Alan Denning, the kid from Archerfield, became managing director of both Pressed Metal and Denning. He was 38 years old. He had built the company in 11 years. He no longer owned a single share of it. The Brisbane City Council, Leyland Panthers came off the line. Denning bus number 420, buses 587 to 721. Painted in council livery, fitted out in those Acacia Ridge production bays. Brisbane was running its public transport on a Lancashire chassis, bodied by a Queensland workshop owned by a British corporation that had just been merged into BLMC by the Wilson Labor government and Tony Benn's Industrial Reorganisation Committee. Australian streets. British profits. In April 1967, between the two Panther contracts, Denning had quietly completed something nobody else in Australia had ever attempted: a fully integrated chassis and body coach. They called it the Mono Coach. Build number 142, American Detroit diesel V6 engine. American Allison automatic transmission from Indianapolis. Australian body, American driveline, British corporate parent. 3 flags on every coach Acacia Ridge built. The country could build the bus. It could not build the engine. It could not even own the company. Every mono coach that left the factory sent profit upstream to Detroit, to Indianapolis and to Lancashire, sold to Grenders of Dandenong, Victoria in September 1967. Each mono coach took over 2,000 hours to build and trim. 2,000 hours. Inside a 3,273 square metre production area, the Acacia Ridge crew was completing 1 full coach a week at peak production. Australia's largest builder of luxury coaches. Ted Rolls, who would later become general manager, told the 2017 reunion that the factory ran with 17 apprentices in training at any time and workplace health and safety systems that were ahead of their time. In October 1971, the first 3-axle monocoach was delivered to Wadmore's coach lines in South Australia. Read the customer list from those years. McCafferty's, Ansett Pioneer, Pioneer Tours, Sundowner, Stateliner, Greyhound, Skenners, Cobb & Co Queensland, Border Coaches, Black and White out of Sandgate, Redline, Murray's in Canberra, Trans Otway, Beans of Wagga, Grenders. Every major Australian long-distance coach operator was running Dennings out of Acacia Ridge. Sealed roads in Central Australia were still rare. 4-wheel drives were largely work vehicles. Regional airports could not handle large aircraft. The mono coach was the vehicle that opened the Australian outback to mass tourism. A Brisbane factory put the country on the road. But here is the thing the customer list does not show you. Every coach sold meant a profit margin flowing upstream from Acacia Ridge to Sydney to Lancashire. A British conglomerate that had just been folded into BLMC, taking Australian capital out of an Australian industry. An empire being financed by the country it was being sold to. And in March 1971, the man who had built the company resigned for the first time. Chapter 5. 5th of February 1975. The 1971 resignation was a warning. The first sign that something was rotten under Leyland control. Earlier that year, 3 long-term Denning employees, Lee Gamer, Dudley Brewer and Charlie Winter, had walked out together to start a rival coach builder called GBW. Body design disputes, management interference. The kind of slow-grinding friction that follows when a founder no longer owns his factory. In March 1971, Alan Denning resigned as managing director and joined Volvo Trucks at Wacol, where Volvo was setting up an Australian operation. Leyland talked him back. By December 1972, he was back at Acacia Ridge, running the company again. The internal climate, however, was not the same. Across the early 1970s, Leyland-controlled Denning persisted with leaf spring coach suspension. Leaf springs, stacked steel strips bolted to a beam axle. The same suspension principle as a horse-drawn cart. In Europe, Citra and Neoplan were already running AIR suspension coaches as standard. The smoother ride, the longer chassis life, the better passenger experience. Senior Leyland management at Acacia Ridge was not interested. Alan Denning's design team, led by chassis engineer Athol. Chapter 6. Denair. In 1976, Alan Denning permanently departed AB Denning & Coleman. The American driveline branding on the coaches was dropped. Without the founder, even the visible Australian-American supply chain compromise that Alan had made work for 2 decades was abandoned. Leyland did not want a Detroit nameplate sitting on a Lancashire-owned coach, so the badge came off. Ted Rolls was promoted to general manager. Bruce Hood became director. Dick White worked the sales floor. The company kept running, the body lines kept moving, and the leaf springs kept clattering. In 1977, a coach operator named Kevin Kirkland returned from a study tour of the United States. Kirkland had seen what the Americans were running on US intercity routes, full air suspension chassis, smoother and longer lived than anything Denning was building. Australia kept looking outside itself for the next idea, to America for the engineering, to Britain for the corporate sign-off. Both decisions were made overseas. Neither was made in Brisbane. 3 years after vetoing exactly this idea from the man who founded the company, Leyland-controlled Denning agreed. On the 9th of August 1978, the first Den Air was delivered to Kevin Kirkland, Australia's first fully air suspended coach. The same technology Alan Denning and Athol McKinnon had presented in February 1975. The same engineering principle, the same component logic 3 years late. In December 1977, Denning also delivered the first bogie drive 6x4 coach chassis to Stateliner in South Australia. The company claimed a world first. International records are murky on this, but in the Australian market no one else had built one. The bogie drive let the rear axle pair share traction, opening up the heavier outback routes. Meanwhile, 10 minutes down the road, Denmac had been building Tourmasters with the same air suspension principle for 2 years. Domino was running them in fleet. Denmac's chassis had over 100 buses on the road by the time the Den Air launched, a 2-year head start gifted by Leyland's veto. Here is what nobody at Acacia Ridge knew that August. The same year Denning launched Den Air, the parent company in the United Kingdom was being effectively nationalised. Lord Stokes, the man who had built BLMC, was being replaced by Sir Michael Edwards. The Wilson Labor government's Ryder report had concluded that British Leyland could not survive without state ownership. Denning was profitable, building 1 luxury coach a week, dominating Australian tourism, and every dollar was flowing to a British parent that the British state had just taken over to stop it from collapsing. And in 1973, 2 years before Alan Denning walked out of his own factory, Leyland Australia had launched a passenger car called the P76, a car so disastrous it would help destroy British Leyland itself. Chapter 7. The P76 and the Secret Withdrawal. The Leyland P76 launched at the Zetland plant in inner Sydney in 1973. Wheels magazine named it Car of the Year, the V8 model. It was supposed to be the all-Australian family sedan that would carry Leyland into the 1980s. Italian designed by Giovanni Michelotti. Australian stylist Romand Rodborough in-house. Roomy enough to swallow a 44-gallon drum in the boot. Production ceased in October 1974, 15 to 18 months after launch. Estimates of the total build run from 16,000 to 18,000 sedans. The financial loss has been reported between $50 and $71 million in 1974 currency, close to $500 million in today's money. The 47 Coupe, the planned Hero variant, had 56 pre-production cars built. 46 were crushed. 10 survived because employees hid them. The same parent company that was forcing leaf springs onto Acacia Ridge was simultaneously losing the equivalent of $500 million, $2,026 on a Sydney-built sedan that nobody would buy. But here is the part of the story that ought to be on the front page of every Australian newspaper that ever ran a Leyland advertisement. In February 1974, 12 months before the air suspension veto, LMC headquarters in the United Kingdom held an internal meeting in which Australian subsidiary executives were told that all manufacturing plants outside the United Kingdom would close. The decision was made. The withdrawal was scheduled. Peter North, who was at the top of Leyland Australia at the time, resigned on the spot. He kept the meeting a secret. He told nobody. The decision to abandon Australian manufacturing was made a full year before Alan Denning's air suspension veto. The senior managers who told him no in the Acacia Ridge boardroom in February 1975 already knew the parent company was leaving the country. Every coach Acacia Ridge built from February 1974 onwards was built by a company that had already decided to wind itself down. The buyers did not know. The workers did not know. The Australian government did not know. Zetland P76 plant closed in 1975. PMC Enfield was wound down. The PMC South Australia operation at Royal Park, Adelaide, was sold to Freighter Industries the same year. The Denning South Australia branch at Beverley, Adelaide, had already closed in mid-1974. In 1979, Denning expanded under licence to New Zealand through the Mount Cook Group, a small offshore success at the moment the Australian operation was being held in secret darkness. And in March 1982, the British company that had spent 15 years killing Australian manufacturing handed Denning to a new owner with a new name, Jaguar Rover Australia. Chapter 8. JRA. In March 1982, Jaguar Rover Australia Limited took over all the assets of Leyland Motor Corporation Australia Limited. The British were exiting via brand reshuffle. Same buildings, same workforce, different letterhead. By November 1984, Denning was being built and distributed by JRA Australia. In August 1984, the first Landseer was delivered to Max Holman's VIP Express in New South Wales, build number 1030. The Landseer was JRA Denning's flagship tour coach for the rest of the decade. Aerodynamic body, the Ansett Pioneer engineering team checked the Landseer's drag coefficient against every major USA, Canada and Australian competitor and reported it the most aerodynamic they had measured. Almost 300 Landseers came off the Acacia Ridgeline between 1984 and 1990. The model was named after Landseer Street, the road outside the factory gates, the address on every invoice. Australia's most famous tour coach name, taken from a Brisbane suburban roadway. A few weeks earlier, on the 14th of March 1984, build number 1000 had rolled out the gates and been handed over to Alistair and Beverly Grant of Sunshine Coast Coaches. Ted Rolls did the presentation. 1,000 coaches built since 1957. 27 years. On the 14th of February 1989, McCafferty's Coaches took delivery of its 100th Denning. Photos from that day show Ted Rolls with Jack and Tony McCafferty, Julia Buckle, Sharon Westling. Smiling. Brand new tour coach behind them. Acacia Ridge running flat out. Through the entire JRA decade, Dick White was on the sales floor, selling Landseers to operators who had been Denning customers in some case for more than 20 years. Institutional memory, personal relationships, coach-by-coach knowledge of fleet. In February 1987, JRA Holdings acquired the share capital of JRA Limited from Austin Rover for $66.6 million. Then, in February 1989, JRA bought Austral Bus and Coach, the Brisbane competitor. Athol Hedges had become, Domino had become Austral. Now JRA owned both Denning at Acacia Ridge and Austral at 356 Bilson Road, Geelong. One holding company, two competing factories, 25 kilometres apart. Anyone watching a corporate acquisition like that knows what happens next. Holding companies do not run two competing factories for long. The Hawke government's May 1988 economic statement was driving tariffs further down. Airline deregulation, scheduled for late 1990, would gut the long-distance coach market within months. Acacia Ridge had built coaches for 33 years through every market shift Australian transport had thrown at it. The next shift was different. In February 1990, JRA made the only decision a holding company controlling two competitors ever makes. Chapter 9. The Empty Gates. In February 1990, JRA announced that all bus and coach production would be transferred from the Denning plant at Acacia Ridge to the former Austral facility at 356 Bilson Road, Geelong, 25 kilometres north. The Acacia Ridge production line, 23 years old, opened with a $2 million order book in 1967, fell silent. The service department stayed on at Acacia Ridge until April 1992, a skeleton operation. Phone calls from operators with broken-down Landseers, spare parts, some warranty work. Then that closed too. The last Landseer rolled off the Geelong line in June 1992. It was fitted with an Austral Denning badge, a hyphenated tombstone, the model named after Landseer Street, built somewhere it had no right to be built. Then JRA Holdings receivers were appointed. The peak workforce at Acacia Ridge has not been publicly disclosed. The 1967 moving figure was 90 staff. By the late 1980s, building one coach a week and running 17 apprenticeships, a reasonable extrapolation puts the displaced workforce at between 150 and 200. The exact number is one of those quiet Australian industrial facts that never made the front page. No press conference, no final shift photograph, no commemorative coach with the workforce signing the inside panels. Dick White stayed in the Brisbane bus industry. Where else does a man with 20 years of Denning sales experience go? He stayed in the city. He kept the contacts. The institutional memory walked out of the gate and kept walking. Then in 1994, Alan Denning came back. He was 64 years old. His son Wade joined him. They opened Alan B. Denning Co. at 22 Colbard Street, Acacia Ridge, different premises from the 1967 factory, 10 minutes drive across the suburb. In February 1995, the first coach off the new Colbard Street floor was a Mercedes OH1418, delivered to Marsh of Nimbin. The body style was called the Galaxy and was fitted on Mercedes, Volvo, Scania and MAN chassis. Alan Denning was building coaches again, 10 minutes from his old factory, on equipment a fraction the size of the A Empire JRA had just liquidated. In 1997, Clifford Corporation Limited bought JRA Holdings out of receivership. By then, the Acacia Ridge factory at Landseer Street had been sitting unused for years. The British corporate succession that had owned Denning for 30 years had finally completed its withdrawal from Australian manufacturing. Alan Denning was building coaches again 10 minutes from his old factory. He had 8 years left. Chapter 10. The Phoenix. In November 2003, Alan B. Denning Company went into administration. The Colbard Street operation could not be sustained. The market that had supported a single integrated tour coach builder under tariff protection in the 1970s no longer existed. 9 years of trading. Done. On the 1st of April 2004, the assets were acquired by a Brisbane company called Aussie Drifter Luxury Motorhomes, which rebranded itself as Denning Manufacturing Pty Limited. The general manager was Michael Dempsey. Within months they launched a new coach called the Denning Phoenix Silver. The company explanation was on the record. The Phoenix name was chosen because the quality products from Denning had, in their words, arisen from the dead. The Phoenix kept the Denning name alive for the next 15 years, producing smaller batches for a specialist market. The brand stayed warm thanks to people who had not founded the company. On the 11th of January 2013, Alan Brown Denning died at 82 years old. He was survived by his wife Joan, his children Wade, Boyd and another adult child, plus 7 grandchildren. The Bus and Coach Society of Victoria published an obituary, Australian Bus Panorama ran a tribute, and the Queensland Omnibus and Coach Society magazine carried a posthumous article. The Australian Dictionary of Biography did not list him, and it still does not. On the 17th of June 2017, more than 150 people gathered at the Acacia Ridge Hotel for the Denning reunion. Ex-workers, family and customers arrived, driven by Dick White, who had spent 2 years insisting the reunion needed to happen. Joan Denning attended and cut a giant celebration cake. Wade Denning gave the morning and afternoon presentations on the company's history. Ted Rolls described the apprenticeship culture, the 17 trainees at any one time, and the WHS systems ahead of their time. Stan Bega, Graham Bristow, Lorraine Douglas-Smith, Nick Wilson, Graham Kircher and Bruce Hood, names that nobody outside the Brisbane bus industry would know, sat together for one Saturday afternoon and remembered the factory 10 minutes drive away. On the 30th of September 2019, Custom Bus Group, a private operation owned by an English-born businessman named Scott Dunn, acquired Denning Manufacturing. Dunn had founded the Telford's commercial vehicle business in the United Kingdom in 2009, emigrated to Australia in 2014, and bought the custom bus operation out of administration in March 2018, after 122 staff had been sacked from the previous owner. Custom Bus had relocated headquarters to St Mary's in Sydney's western outskirts in May 2018. Brisbane was being absorbed into a Sydney operation. In the years that followed, the rebadged Custom Denning launched the Element 2, a battery electric city bus. ZFMA Trax 300 kilowatt motor, 462 kilowatt-hour 4C power batteries, 500 kilometre range. By March 2025, Custom Denning had built 103 Element 2 buses and delivered 93. Air suspension across the entire range. The chassis Leyland vetoed in 1975 was now in mainstream production in St Mary's, New South Wales. Sometime over the second half of 2024, manufacturing operations at the Acacia Ridge facility ceased. Industry sources reported it. There was no public ceremony, no formal closure announcement on the Custom Denning website. By Custom Denning's March 2025 media release, the only manufacturing facilities listed were St Mary's, New South Wales and Wingfield, South Australia. Brisbane had quietly disappeared from the corporate map. Stand on the corner of Landseer Street and Ingram Road in Acacia Ridge, Brisbane today. Chapter 11, Landseer Street. The 31,000 square metre site is still there. The 1967 factory building is still there. The Colbard Street second site, 10 minutes away, is still there. There is no heritage plaque on either. There is no acknowledgement that Australia's largest tour coach builder operated on this corner for 23 years. 2 streets in one direction is the old Holden plant site, closed in 1984, now Woolworths Distribution. 4 blocks in another direction is the old Toyota Queensland Regional Headquarters. Acacia Ridge was Brisbane's southern manufacturing precinct. None of it builds anything anymore. Lesson 1. Australian innovation gets vetoed by foreign owners and built somewhere else. Alan Denning designed the air suspension chassis. Leyland refused it. He built it 10 minutes down the road, and his version ran in production for 20 years, while the Leyland-controlled product fell behind. Every Australian manufacturing decade has a version of this story. The Australian engineer with the better idea. The foreign parent that says no. The patent that ends up working perfectly fine in the rival product nobody is allowed to mention. Australia keeps inventing things its owners do not want it to make. The reason is structural. When the parent company is overseas, the local subsidiary's engineering authority is purely advisory. Real decisions live in Lancashire, in Stockholm, in Detroit, in Tokyo. The address changes. The answer to Australian innovation is the same. No. Lesson 2. Foreign ownership is a slow-motion withdrawal disguised as investment. In February 1974, BLMC's London headquarters told Australian subsidiary executives that all overseas manufacturing was going to close. The decision was made. Peter North resigned on the spot and kept the meeting confidential. 16 years passed before Acacia Ridge actually closed. 16 years of buyers signing contracts with a company that had already decided to leave the country. 16 years of workers signing on, raising kids, taking apprentices, on a factory floor whose end was already scheduled in another hemisphere. The Australian buyers did not know. The Australian workers did not know. The Australian government did not know. The decision was made in a London boardroom and held in Australian darkness for 16 years. There was no requirement to disclose. There still is not. And while Britain held the corporate veto, America held the engine bay. Every Australian-built coach in 1975 ran on a Detroit motor and an Indianapolis gearbox. We were a workshop for 2 empires. Britain decided what Australia was allowed to build. America decided what powered it. Australia just ran the assembly line. Lesson 3. The brand survives. The empire dies. The street keeps the name. Custom Denning today builds electric buses in St Mary's, New South Wales, over 1,000 kilometres from Acacia Ridge. The Element 2 has air suspension, just like the chassis Leyland vetoed in 1975. The Brisbane site is empty. The factory that bodied 136 of the buses in the largest Leyland Panther order on Earth is empty. The street it sat on still carries the name of the most famous tour coach Australia ever built. Nobody in Acacia Ridge today knows why. The Australian bus industry survived. The Denning name survived. The Acacia Ridge factory did not. The men who walked out of the boardroom on the 5th of February 1975 were proven right about the chassis, right about the country's capacity to build it, and right about the foreign management whose decision they refused to accept. None of being right saved the building. On the morning of the 5th of February 1975, 4 men walked out of a boardroom in Acacia Ridge, Brisbane. The argument had been about leaf springs. They were right about the suspension. They were right about the country. They were right about the foreign management whose decision they refused. Within 48 hours, they had registered a new company. Within 2 years, their chassis was on the road. Within 20 years, the Leyland-controlled Denning was gone. Today, the factory is empty. The street still carries the name. British chassis, American engines, Australian hands. Alan Denning was right about everything except how long it would take for the country he was right about to lose interest in proving him right.